Quickly introduce myself. I'm Eric Telford from the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity, formerly with Americans for Prosperity, who's hosting this track of events today. And when I was at AFP, we started the Right Online initiative, which was focused on getting citizens trained and involved in online activism. And what we're here to talk about today is citizen journalism. I want to tell you quickly about the Franklin Center, since most of you probably aren't familiar with them. We try to build capacity at the state level for investigative and state capitol news bureau reporters. So we've seen the trend with reporters getting laid off left and right in the mainstream media, just generally not doing their job. So we put free market oriented reporters in state capitals all around the country to make sure that the taxpayers are getting the news of what's happening, investigative reporters who can do the long-term stories digging into pension abuse and that sort of thing, to make sure the public is informed. The problem is we can only have 1 or 2 people in each state, and we need thousands of them all across the country to dig in at the state and local level and get the truth out about everything that's going on out there. And that's where all of you come into play. So we're going to talk about that today, the importance of that, and how you can get involved. And we really think that the only thing worse than a left-wing media is no media at all. And that's what we're seeing today, either bias in the media where they're not telling the truth about what's happening, they're not telling the taxpayers and the public the critical information that they need, or reporters that are getting laid off and just beats that aren't being covered at all that really deserve to be. And we believe that the greatest threats to our freedom and prosperity occur when nobody's paying attention. It's at those school board meetings, at those county council meetings, at those other local government meetings where there's not a single representative from the media to cover what's happening and tell the public, and not a single member of the public there to watch what's happening and hold those elected officials accountable. I can speak to this firsthand. When I was in high school, I was the student rep on my board of education, and I remember the superintendent proposing a massive budget increase. And I was literally sitting in meetings where they were talking about how do we spend all the money we have before the end of the year, or they'll take it away from us. And there were no reporters there were no members of the public, nobody knew what was happening, but the superintendent wanted a massive, like 25% budget increase over the previous year when they couldn't even spend all of those funds. And luckily I was able to tell some reporters, I was able to tell some political activists who voted down that budget 4 times before they had to accept a flatline increase. But the fact of the matter is that that's just not happening, and people aren't being informed about those kind of events anymore. You look at things like a school board, they have the parent-teacher organizations, which are like a grassroots arm of the superintendent. And I remember my parents got a handwritten letter from another parent saying, please turn out and vote for this random election day, in May, to vote for this budget increase, or Eric's going to be sitting on the floor and not have textbooks. And this kind of stuff is happening all across the country every day, but people just don't know about it. And that's why it's critical that you get involved. I talk to activists and Tea Party folks all the time who say they're tired of the rah-rah rallies, they want to get involved and make a difference, and we believe that this is the most critical area where people can do just that. So for example, we want people at every local government meeting. We want people at every left-wing or union event. We want people there every single time Obama comes to your town, or every single Senate or House or local political rally that's happening. People at every polling station, so like what happened in Philadelphia in 2008 with Black Panthers intimidating white voters. We want people there with webcams to capture that and make sure that the mainstream media covers it, we're holding them accountable, and that your fellow citizens are hearing about that happening as well. We want people that can go out to graveyards and take pictures of the tombstones of every dead voter that turns out on election day to vote for a Democrat. We want people who can comb through the government data to expose the rampant waste, fraud, and abuse that's happening out there every single day and isn't getting covered. How many of you heard the story a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, about Bell, California? This was a town of 38,000 people where public officials were making $800,000 a year for their salary. With that story breaking, it led to corruption charges filed against 6 public officials and voters making a clean sweep of all of their government officials in the next election. And stuff like that is happening all over the place, but nobody is there to cover it. And that's what we want you all to do. I want to give a few examples of why this is important and what some other people are doing or have done, some examples you may have heard of, others that you haven't, that will hopefully inspire you that you can make a difference and some ways in which you can get involved. There's a guy named Bob Weeks in Wichita, Kansas, who runs a blog called Voice for Liberty in Wichita. Now, he probably gets only a few hundred blog visits a month, but what he started doing was going to every local government meeting with his flip cam and covering it. And when he first started out, he said that at the city council meeting, folks would show up in jeans and a t-shirt, the city council members, and then he started filming them, and they started showing up in suits and ties. And beyond what they were wearing, what they talked about and the way they talked about issues started to change because they knew somebody was there holding them accountable. And he started to post that video, and he started to blog about it. And pretty soon on the email sign-up form on his website, he started seeing email addresses of every one of those city council members signing up for his email alerts. He started seeing all of the local journalists in the area and state-level journalists signing up for those as well. And even though he may only get 200, 300 unique blog visits a month, he's getting the right kind of visitors, and the work that he's done has made a dramatic change in Wichita. Let's talk about at the national level for a second, an example you might be familiar with. How many of you remember Dan Rather? Well, Dan Rather put forth the fraudulent story about President Bush's National Guard service in 2004. CBS stood completely behind him, attesting to the authenticity of those documents. It was a typewriter expert in Montana who knew that the typesetting used to create those documents didn't even exist yet in the year they were supposedly created. He commented on a conservative blog. That picked it up, and the story went national and started to snowball from there. But think about that in the age before the internet. If some random guy from Montana had called CBS News on their main line and said, hey, I'm a typewriter expert, I think he would have heard a click pretty quickly. But because of the internet and because of the tools we have available today, this is the kind of work that can be done by citizens like you. These are the kind of results that we can see, and it's as a result of this that Dan Rather is no longer at the head of CBS Evening News, and I think we're all grateful for that. Talking about where things intersect at the national and local level, many of you followed what just happened in the New York 9th Congressional District. And everybody's focusing on the coverage of how this is a major shift in favor of the Republicans, and it was a referendum against Obama and his agenda and his current lagging popularity. And I'm sure if all of you recall what led to this, it was citizen journalism. It was the fact that somebody on Twitter and Andrew Breitbart picked up this story and started questioning Anthony Weiner, and without that, the mainstream media would still be out there looking for the real person that Anthony Weiner claimed actually sent the tweet. We know that not to be the case. The mainstream media was not doing their job. They were falling flat on their face. It was because of citizen journalists and people like Andrew Breitbart that the truth came to light, that it led to the results that it did, and that that special election even happened in the first place. And that's the kind of work that any of you in this room can do. We have the infrastructure at the national level with people like Andrew Breitbart, with people at Town Hall like Guy Benson, who once we uncover these stories, we can get them out there and we can lead to real change. You may not be familiar with or may not remember the story in the 2010 midterm elections. There was an incumbent Democrat in North Carolina who was considered a safe re-election effort named Bob Etheridge. And none of the national parties would get involved to help the Republican challenger because they thought she didn't have a chance in hell. She was somebody who got involved in politics only at the start of the Tea Party. She was a nurse. She got involved because of Obamacare. And people thought, well, this is great that she's running, but she just doesn't have a chance whatsoever. Well, she didn't have a chance until a few college students got their flip cams and confronted this congressman in DC, and Congressman Bob Etheridge, rather than just politely answering their questions, decided to put a chokehold on one of them while the other filmed it, and that's why he's now former Congressman Bob Etheridge. And getting a flip cam, and you don't need to be a professional journalist or have that kind of background to do this work. You just need to show up and have your still camera even, or your video camera, your flip cam, your cell phone ready. And these are the kind of stories that we can expose and can really have broad implications and powerful results at the national, state, or local level. You may also be familiar with Think Progress, which is a left-wing blog run through the Center for American Progress. And they have a staff of reporters that go to every single Tea Party. They go to every single event on our side, and they're doing these hit pieces on us. There was one recently, one of their reporters is named Lee Fong. And his big thing is that everybody's racist. And so if you say hello to him, you're racist. If you pronounce his last name, which is spelled F-A-N-G as Fang, you're racist because you're supposed to know that it's Lee Fong. But he shows up everywhere and he confronts people. And a year or two ago, he showed up at a Tea Party and started filming this one person that could have been a plant, we don't know, but one person at the Tea Party who was spewing off some racist rhetoric. And what he didn't show was the context that everybody around this person was screaming, those views don't belong here, get out of here. But he just filmed this one person in isolation, put it up, and it became a national news story. It was on all of the cable news networks. It was making national news all across the country. And thank God there were some folks on our side that took a few steps back with their own cameras and filmed the context of what was happening, and were able to expose him. We're in a position where we not only need to go on the offense with citizen journalism, but we need to be on defense as well. And in addition to being at every Obama rally, being at every political rally for federal, state, and local offices here in Florida, we need folks at every single one of our events to cover the context of what's happening and make sure that the public is well informed about the truth, because there are certainly smear jobs happening on us. So I want to wrap up quickly by just saying that, before we go to our other folks on the panel here, citizen journalism is not opinion blogging. And we're here doing new media training today. Oftentimes people talk about blogging. It's the same technology, it's the same platforms. But you can either go out and complain about things, you can pontificate about things, or you can go out and you can get people fired. And I think that's what we want to do. We want to make real differences. We want to expose the truth about what's happening. And the truth is so awful right now that you don't need to add commentary to it in order for it to have an impact. Our goal really is to have thousands of Andrew Breitbarts all across the country. It's what the blogger Glenn Reynolds calls an army of Davids, but rather than using slingshots, they have laptops, cell phones, flip cams to take down the Goliaths of big government and big media. So I will close with a homework assignment. And this is something that every time I do new media training I do, and the people that get started with this generally seem to at least find it as a great outlet for their activism and find it rewarding. Pick your least favorite public official and beat the crap out of them every day. Tell the story that the mainstream media is not. And I promise you, you may not have 1,000 visitors on your blog or your site, but the folks that are paying attention, the people you're writing about, are going to see that and it's going to alter their behavior. Every single elected official, either they or their staff, have what's known as Google News alerts. And anytime something's written about them online or in any print or online media, they get an email about it. So at the end of the day, you're going to know that you're reaching them, and you can give them phone calls, you can send them emails, you can show up at rallies, but these people are very vain and they're very thin-skinned, and when they see the way they're being portrayed in the media, oftentimes they're going to react in powerful ways, either with a brash reaction that could be newsworthy when they send you an email and threaten to sue you, or say something over the top that you can then make into a whole nother story, or it just will start to get to them and affect their behavior in ways that you wouldn't expect. So I think if you all go home and try this, I want to point you to a resource. This is out at the Americans for Prosperity booth that's just downstairs. It's their Citizen Action Handbook, and this covers a lot of the things that I talked about when it comes to Google News alerts, how you can sign up for them so that you can track people and what's going on. It talks about where you can go to set up a blog. If you want to be a blogger, the different platforms, they're all free. It only takes a few minutes. We don't want to walk you through it today because different people get hung up at different aspects, but it's really incredibly easy and only takes a moment. We have screenshots and step-by-step instructions, so that will point you toward there. And also, if you are interested in the social media stuff that's being covered next door, it has how-to step-by-step instructions on Facebook, Twitter, and those tools as well. So our goal is really to get as many of you involved as possible in this kind of work, whether it's blogging, whether it's citizen journalism, but making sure that you make your voice heard and that the elected officials and the mainstream media know that people are out there holding them accountable and that the real news will eventually come to light. With that, I want to turn things over to Guy Benson and Kelly Carson, who I'll just introduce briefly. Guy, as I said, is the national political editor at townhall.com, and he's going to give some remarks on the importance of all of this stuff from his perspective. And then we're going to go to Kelly Carson, who is a veteran journalist, has worked for many, many years all across the country as both a reporter and an editor, who can talk a little bit more about the journalistic principles and some of the tools and resources that you all can use to get involved. And then we want to save as much time as possible for questions, because we find that people always think that to be the most valuable aspect of these sessions. So with that, thank you all again for being here, and I will turn it over to Guy Benson.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you all for being here. I'm glad you found us, despite some of the scheduling snafus. I think my boss would have my head if I didn't point out that you should all, here's my homework assignment, visit townhall.com and hotair.com every day. Our sister sites, 50 million clicks a month between those two sites. And we're making a difference. And we're making a difference because of, frankly, a lot of people that Eric just talked about. All of you, people who are armed with nothing more than a camera or a notepad or a laptop, who can expose rank corruption or outrageous behavior from our elected officials from coast to coast, because we can't be everywhere. So people say, well, how can I work at townhall.com? How can I get the reach of townhall.com? And the answer is, we have a limited budget like everyone else. We have a certain number of people on staff, but it's up to all of us to get the job done. And here's why. I'm not necessarily breaking news here, but the mainstream media is systemically corrupt. I went to journalism school at Northwestern University, where they train our future journalists, and I got a great education there. But I will tell you, some people, mostly the professors, some of them were intentionally biased, but a lot of the students were kind of default biased, insulated, having no idea how biased they really were, how their worldview shaped their coverage and their story selection and what they think is worth covering. Because they drill into journalism students what is newsworthy. And it's amazing, someone from a center-left perspective who might be a delightful human being, who doesn't even think that they're a committed leftist necessarily, they won't think that something is newsworthy when in fact it is. And so that's the conservative media's job, is to level that playing field. One perfect example, recently, last week, of mainstream media corruption is a story coming out of Washington State. Now, let's recall, for a little bit of context here, during the entire debt debate, where conservatives and Tea Partiers and Republicans were saying what? If we're going to raise that debt ceiling again by trillions of dollars, let's not raise taxes in the middle of a recession, let's get a dollar-for-dollar spending reduction. These are not wild, crazy-eyed ideas. But in order to stand by those principles and insist on them, what were we called? Not just by 4 New York Times columnists, not just by 2 Politico columnists, not just by a few congressmen behind closed doors at a Democrat-only meeting, but by the Vice President of the United States who issued a non-denial denial. We were called terrorists. Terrorists. These are civility police, by the way. These are the civility police calling us terrorists. And what was the phrase that we heard over and over again? Hostages. They are holding the economy hostage. They're hostage takers. Last week and it might be 2 weeks ago now, in Washington State, and I think also California, a group of longshoremen, unionized longshoremen, felt that they had a right to work at a plant where their demands were too high, so management did not hire them. They hired other union workers, but these longshoremen felt that they had a right to work there. So what did they do? They stormed the facility, they broke down the gates, and they took the security guards hostage, literally took them hostage. The police showed up, and a police sergeant was threatened with a baseball bat and was told this is just the beginning. And they sabotaged this factory's ability to do its work and produce the product. Crickets from the mainstream media. This is a mainstream media that called us terrorists for being worried about our debt problem and hostage takers, and when people on the left were literally taking hostages in the name of their own selfish interests, nothing. And that story got some local play, but it only started to percolate up to any national prominence when local bloggers and citizens flagged the story and started alerting folks like myself who were in a fortunate position, and Michelle Malkin and others, to have a broader audience. And this is where our partnership, frankly, comes in. Because I consider myself a conservative. I don't make any bones about that in what I write and what I say. But I also consider myself a journalist with journalistic standards. And I think that what we have to do here is, look, we're all about choice and competition. And if we offer a better choice and compete with the mainstream media on their own turf where they refuse to do their own job, we're going to win. And that's why we are winning. And that's why they're getting increasingly desperate and frustrated. And that's a testament to everyone on the ground. And if you look at it at the state level here in Florida, I don't know if any of you guys read the Shark Tank blog, Javier, he's just a guy. He's just a dude. And he helped make Marco Rubio. He introduced me in D.C. last week to a woman named Karen Harrington, who is running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz for Congress. Here's a woman who's a small businesswoman who has 95 employees, who knows what it takes to create jobs and help the economy. And you've got Debbie Wasserman Schultz running around doing what she does. And Javier, here at the state level, was able to bring this woman to my attention before there was a big flood of attention, because look, the presidential race is going to suck up all the oxygen. That's just how it works. So if we want to take losers like Debbie Wasserman Schultz out, it's going to take people who are on the ground locally who can sniff this stuff out, because frankly, sitting in Washington, D.C., these are things I'm not going to know about. When the whole Wisconsin thing blew up, and that was a glorious series of events, I must say, I relied frequently on local, not just talk radio hosts, but local bloggers and writers on the ground in Wisconsin, whether it's Steve Eggleston or Madison Conservative or Ann Alda. I mean, there was a whole group of them who knew really the intricacies of the story. And I know that there's sometimes maybe a little bit of frustration at the local and state level. I understand this when the national folks swoop in and start covering the story because you've been doing the work. Any good conservative blogger or writer or TV commentator or radio host worth his or her salt, when they get their information from someone else, this is our part of the game. We better give credit where credit is due, because this is how the organism works. We're not the ones breaking the story, so we're not the ones to take credit for the story. Sometimes we're going to break it, sometimes we're not, but we're going to amplify. And ultimately, that's the goal, is to amplify and eventually force the mainstream media to cover things. See, this is the new food chain in the media. Sometimes it'll start with one guy with a flip cam in the middle of North Carolina. He'll get it to a North Carolina blogger who will get it to Michelle Malkin. Malkin will tweet it out. I'll be at work. I'll see the tweet. I'll click on the link. I'll see the video and say, wow, this is outrageous. I'll put it at townhall.com. There'll be thousands of people clicking on that because it's not because I'm necessarily a wonderful, insightful person, but because there's a lot of people just like going to townhall.com. Although, please tell my boss that it's all because of my insight. And then it'll migrate to Mark Levin and Sean Hannity and Hugh Hewitt and Rush Limbaugh. And then some producer at Fox will see it, and it'll make it on Fox News. And then there's that key moment where it'll finally break through to mainstream media. And a guy who does a great job of this is Brian Ross at ABC News. He was the first guy to touch the Jeremiah Wright scandal, which is what it was in 2008 in the mainstream press. He's the one who's been breaking and doing outstanding work on the Solyndra stuff, which is going on right now. And if you don't know about Solyndra, you better get acquainted with it, because it's a scandal that really could have massive implications for the administration, taking them down. So that's kind of how the food chain works. And the story doesn't get to Brian Ross and then on to Good Morning America unless that video is taken to begin with. And that's where people who might not have have the time or ability to be a full-time journalist or be a full-time blogger, but if you're out on the street and if you're committed, that's all the movement can ask of you, and it really genuinely pays dividends, because who knew? And this Eric kind of stole my example, but it's a common example. The typewriter expert in Montana. Here's a guy who, I'm not even exaggerating, might have saved a presidency. I mean, the media was trying to take out George W. Bush with an absolute lie. It was 60 Minutes, gold standard, media gold standard. One guy in Montana brought down that entire story, brought down CBS News and two of their anchors and one of their big producers, and very well might have done a major solid in saving a presidency and saving us from 4 years of John Kerry. So, I mean, that's one example, and there are smaller examples, but still important ones along those lines from across the country. And I just have to encourage you to get involved. I think we have an existential fight on our hands in terms of this country as it exists. And the other side is absolutely ruthless. If any of you were at the Breitbart breakfast this morning, they are absolutely ruthless. We don't have to be ruthless. We don't have to be mean-spirited, but we do have to be relentless. And I still believe that in a society like this, the truth will win out if it comes to light. And that's all of our responsibility on this panel and in this audience. So I'll stop there. I look forward to your questions. Thank you guys again for being here.
And again, just a very quick announcement for those of you that have joined us in progress. There was a snafu on the main schedule, so this is the session on the importance of local and state citizen journalism. Humor and effective content will be happening right after this one, and Social Media 101 is going on next door. So right now we will go to Kelly Carson with the Franklin Center, again, who is a veteran journalist and a news editor for all of the reporters at the state level across the country that Franklin hosts. And she can talk about some of the insights about journalistic principles and how you all can get involved, and then we're going to take your questions. Thank you.
And you stole my story.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I wanted to talk about the Wisconsin story real quick. because that was probably one of the, we have a site in Wisconsin, wisconsinreporter.com, and that, while it was a huge story, we call it the nuclear bomb that set off, we had tremendous discussions among the two reporters that we have for the entire state about how to cover this story. And it finally got down to the point where we were talking about our own personal bias that every journalist, every writer brings to any story. And I finally said that, yes, I do have a bias. You bet I do. I'm biased for the taxpayer. And the person who I was debating with said, well, these protesters, these union protesters are taxpayers too. And I picked up the newspaper, the Madison paper and the Milwaukee paper, and I said, and here are their voices. Where are your voices? No one is covering the voice of the taxpayer who isn't involved in a union, who isn't involved in some left-wing activist organization. So it becomes incumbent on citizen journalists, who I put in a different category than blogger, because when bloggers came out as a journalist, I would not even say the word, okay? But citizen journalists then become the helpful right arm of journalism. Journalism is a very sad state of affairs these days. My grandmother started a newspaper in the 1930s in western Oklahoma. And my mother was a journalist, was the first woman to work in the newsroom of a daily newspaper in South Carolina in the 50s. And to think what, you know, they're gone now, but the change that we have seen, it would be very disheartening for them. It really would. But if you look at the history of journalism, if you look at how journalism came about in this country, it came about after the original Tea Party. It came about through the pamphleteers. It came about with people having the guts to stand up and say, this is not right. Now, as a traditional mainstream, I don't say mainstream media anymore, but as an old school journalist, I would offer you just a few tips. Tell the truth. Just tell the truth. If you find something at your school board, at your fire district, at your police department that is not right, get the facts and tell the truth. Hold these people accountable. But not only the public officials accountable, but also the people who are bringing you the information. Everyone has a motive. Find out why this person is giving you this information. Just because Sally at the school board may have an extra $1,500 in her checking account this month, there may be good reason for it. It may not be that she took it out of the school fund. So find out what the motivation of the person giving you the information might be. And then maintain your own credibility. You've got to do that. If you're going to be a citizen journalist, the quickest way to get knocked out is to compromise your own credibility. Everybody makes mistakes. I've made mistakes in reporting. Luckily, I had, you know, the umbrella of a large news organization behind me. Learn from mistakes that you make, admit mistakes that you make, admit them in print. Don't repeat the mistake, but admit that you made the mistake. And then that will help you build your credibility. And then as you go forward into your towns, I want to offer you, and I'm not going to talk as long or eloquently as you did, but I want to.
You're right about long.
Yeah, and eloquently. There's a lot of resources that are available for citizen journalists out there, and my favorite is sunshinereview.org. That shows you, it will track the changes in sunshine laws and open meeting laws in every state. There is FOIApedia, FOIApedia.org, which also will tell you what's going on in your various states with FOIA laws and what, where the trends are. And then to just round things out, for state and state elected officials and constitutional officers in your various states, there's ballotpedia.org, which also has aggregated news from your various states. Now, I see all these great red bags sitting around, and this is wonderful. I am at Franklin because the Examiner closed the office in Baltimore, and I lost my job. It's the first time in my life I've ever had a newspaper close on me. But it wasn't the first newspaper to close. It just happened to me for the first time. Newspapers are closing around the country every day. Your weekly newspapers are gone. Your afternoon newspapers are gone. Your morning newspapers are weak. And if they're still alive, they're very weak. You have single voice sources out there. You have the Associated Press. The Associated Press is nothing more than taking a story from the St. Petersburg Times and running it in the Miami Herald. Same story, exact same story. St. Petersburg Times and the Miami Herald run the Capitol Bureau in Tallahassee. There are no other reporters up there. If you're from Florida, the only news you're getting is from the St. Petersburg Times and the Miami Herald. And I don't think that's right. Because there was when I was young and working for Gannett, there was a big sign that said, "A world of many voices." And that's what we have to be, because the traditional media is just not going to do it anymore. So it's up to you.
Thank you, Kelly. We'll go to questions in just a minute, but I want to say, if you think the mainstream media is doing their job, then go to a local government meeting, because I promise you, you will be shocked at the lack of media there to cover it or the lack of any public there to observe it. Just go and watch that meeting and come out of it and decide if it's something you want to get involved in, because more often than not, they're not there to cover it. They're, if anything, looking at the minutes of what happened and writing a story or interviewing people after the fact through a phone call, because either they're too lazy or they don't have the resources to cover everything that's happening. And the left is out there, and they are. And we have a choice. We can either let them define the political playing field and win, or we can get out there and do it ourselves. And that's what we have to do. That's what we're counting on all of you to do. Florida's going to be a critical state. How many of you are here in Florida? You're going to be a key presidential state, probably the deciding one. You're going to have a key Senate race. You're going to have races at the state and local level that are really going to matter. And it's such a critical time to get out there. You know, the advent of the Tea Party and this upsurge in activism was a really powerful and wonderful thing, but it's not enough to just go to the rallies and wave a sign. We've got to get out there at the local level. We've got to cover what's happening. We need to make sure that they know they're being held accountable and that the rest of our citizens are informed about what's going on as well, so come election day they can make a good informed decision. So with that, we hope you all get involved. We want to answer any of the questions that you have. Again, I want to encourage you all to stop by the Americans for Prosperity booth downstairs and get the Citizen Action Handbook, which gives you a lot of resources and a lot of tips on how you can get started on this stuff. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are on Facebook? How many on Twitter? How many have a blog? How many of you do YouTube stuff? So to be a citizen journalist, you don't have to be like an old-time professional reporter that does every aspect from tracking down the story, interviewing people, writing it up. I think we're moving more toward a model of information activism where, one, if you're just in the room and they know that you're paying attention, that's going to be step one to holding them accountable. If you're getting that on tape and posting it and not even writing a story, or just feeding these leads to mainstream media journalists and leading to the result of them getting these stories out there, that's critical as well. I'm sure many of you turn on the evening news all the time and see, you know, grainy, shaky video footage that has the credit of some citizen in the bottom corner. That's because news stations aren't sending camera crews out around anymore. And oftentimes you don't know what's going to happen. And all of you can have your cell phone and you can get video of what's happening and get it out there in an instant using social media or even just emailing it to a media outlet. But they don't have the resources or the will to cover what's happening out there, so I hope all of you will. And with that, we will take any of your questions.
Can I just add one thing about Twitter? Because I saw fewer hands go up about Twitter than Facebook. Twitter is so important because a lot of movers and shakers within even the mainstream media are on Twitter. You have unprecedented access to major journalistic figures on Twitter. I mean, you can send a tweet to Jake Tapper at ABC News, and there's a decent chance he's going to see it. And you know when he's checking Twitter because he's tweeting. So if he's tweeting, you know that he's on it, he's paying some attention, and a lot of people in this industry have a little bit of an ego. Not me, but everyone else does. And so they want to see what people are saying to them or about them. So there's TweetDeck and those sorts of things where you can see your feeds. And then this happens all the time. I will get tips from people who say, look at this video. Have you seen this YouTube video? Have you seen this story in one of my local papers? And then if it angers me enough, then that becomes a blog post at townhall.com. And if it's a big enough thing, it's on our front page, and we're talking about tens of thousands of hits in the span of a couple hours. And so, and it's not just, it's not just tweeting me, it's tweeting Michelle Malkin, it's tweeting my colleague Ed Morrissey at Hot Air, and mainstream media stuff. You really have an opportunity. I feel like emails are ignored more often than some tweets. I mean, because there's a way to, sometimes you can find ways to get under their skin, challenging them in a way where you almost like get to their guilt a little bit and they see it in real time. And it's easier to get them, I think, to click on a link that you send them in a tweet than it is for them to actually open an email that you send them. So that's just a word of encouragement on Twitter.
And to that end, as we take your questions, I want you all to keep in mind that the Franklin Center is here to be a resource for any of you interested in getting involved in this sphere. Come and get my card or come and get Kelly's card at the end. And we're not going to tell you everything that you need to know in the next few minutes here, but we want to provide you with the resources. That's our job, to make sure that we can get as many people out there all across the country doing this and doing it effectively as possible. So for any follow-up mentoring you want, questions you have, if you start doing this and you find some great material and you want to get it out there, we can help connect you to folks like Guy or other national media outlets to make sure that we get some focus and get some attention and eyeballs on that story. So please come see us afterwards if this is something you're serious about following through with. And with that, I saw a few hands, so who has questions? Yes, sir.
Kind of an operational question. My name is Phil. I'm from Sarasota. I have a blog and I write satire. Every now and then I'll put something serious in this thing. That wasn't funny. And sometimes I get people that's terrible. What's your source for that? One of them was Governor Brewer refuses gun permit, sales permit to DOJ to sell guns to illegals. And I got an email back. What's your source for that story? Satire. But what